There is one thing people discover far too late, not that the world is unfair, but that the world was never built to be fair. In every room you enter, there is an invisible hierarchy. It is not determined by money, it is not determined by education, but by the level of intelligence at which each person understands the game of power. Some ask for permission to exist. Others decide the direction in which everyone else moves, and almost no one realizes when they pass from one category into another. Society has given you a comfortable definition of intelligence: good memory, fast reasoning, degrees, academic performance. It was necessary. Because real intelligence, the kind that modifies human behavior and the distribution of power, cannot be safely taught. Machiavelli observed without sentimentality. People in general judge more by what they see than by what they understand, and what they see is enough to maintain order, but not enough to control it. Real intelligence is not the accumulation of information, it is the ability to see the mechanism behind human reactions. This ability evolves in levels, not moral, not spiritual, but functional. Each level changes how you perceive people, risk, and freedom. And the ascent is not pleasant, because every step requires abandoning an illusion that once protected you. The first level of intelligence is the most stable, and precisely for that reason, it is almost impossible to observe from within. The person here does not feel limited, they feel integrated. Their life functions according to a predictable model: learn, work, follow rules, seek security. There is no major internal conflict. Decisions are made through social reference. What is accepted, what is safe, what is normal. This is the intelligence of adaptation. The mind becomes extremely efficient at navigating existing rules without questioning them. Not because the person could not think critically, but because psychological stability depends on the belief that the system is legitimate. Machiavelli wrote, "The crowd is always attracted by appearance and success." Appearance provides orientation. Most people do not seek the deep truth of a situation, they seek the reduction of uncertainty. An opinion shared by many calms faster than one that is demonstrably correct. That is why consensus becomes a mental compass. A person checks the reaction of the group before establishing their position. Not consciously, instinctively. Intelligence at this level serves belonging. Conflict is avoided. Authority is assumed legitimate. Risk is interpreted as an existential threat. And the paradox matters. Civilization depends on this level. Without it, large-scale cooperation would not exist. But there is an inevitable limit, because reality produces moments in which conformity no longer provides protection. A person follows the rules and still loses. They are loyal and replaced. They work correctly and remain invisible. A silent dissonance appears. The question that destabilizes the first level. If I did everything right, why doesn't the result appear? This is the first awakening. The second level begins with suspicion. The person realizes that the world does not function exclusively on merit. They notice influence, status, perception. They understand that a game exists, but they still do not master it. So they do what is natural for a mind caught between dependence and autonomy. They imitate. Intelligence becomes mimetic. Reading changes, speech changes, public identity changes. The person begins adopting ideas about power, psychology, manipulation, success. But these ideas are worn as symbols, not as instruments. Machiavelli warned, "Few perceive what you truly are. Most see what you appear to be." Level 2 is dominated by the desire to appear lucid. Constant criticism appears. The masses are analyzed, leaders are exposed, other people's strategies are discussed, but direct responsibility is avoided. Criticism provides a safe position. It allows a feeling of superiority without exposure to risk. Intelligence becomes performative. Discussions no longer pursue clarity, they pursue validation. The intellectual ego begins to form. The person no longer seeks the truth of an idea, they seek confirmation of their intellectual identity. This is the trap, because reality does not reward those who understand concepts, it rewards those who produce measurable effects. And after some time, fatigue appears. The fatigue of proving, of arguing, of explaining, and a cold shift appears. Silent. You begin to notice that people who advance quickly almost never discuss intelligence. They calculate. Level 3 marks the first real rupture. Strategic intelligence. Social validation ceases to be the priority. Abstract truth becomes secondary. Results become what matters. Machiavelli stated this logic directly. In the actions of men, especially rulers, the final result is what is judged. At this level, the world is no longer moral or immoral. It becomes predictable. Each individual operates from relatively stable combinations of fear and desire. Observation replaces reaction. You no longer listen only to what people say. You observe what they avoid, what they protect, what they negotiate. You understand that most behaviors are not the result of beliefs, but of interests. Change the interest and behavior aligns by itself. Interactions become calculated. Time is invested selectively. Energy is directed strategically. Relationships are evaluated by impact. The first real forms of influence appear, but the hidden cost appears as well. Because once you begin to see mechanisms, it becomes difficult to believe in spontaneity. Compliments feel tactical, promises feel temporary, loyalty feels conditional. Trust decreases, vigilance increases. Many powerful people remain here permanently. They have results, they have status, they have local control, but they live in a constant state of evaluation. Because strategic intelligence still reacts to an existing system, you are still playing the game, only now you play it better. And here appears the realization that separates the next category. True power does not belong to the one who optimizes the rules, but to the one who assumes the authority to impose them. Most stop before this point, because the next level requires abandoning the final psychological protection, the need to be liked. In the second part, we will enter the zone where intelligence becomes visible, uncomfortable, and inevitably dominant. The moment when a person's presence begins to reorganize the behavior of others without explanation. And from there, the hierarchy becomes far colder. There is a precise moment in the evolution of a mind when analysis ceases to be enough. Up to this point, you have observed, you have understood, you have calculated, but you still waited for the right moment. And the truth few accept is this: the right moment never appears for those who still seek internal permission. Level 4 begins exactly here, not through accumulation of knowledge, but through a rare psychological decision, the acceptance that visible power inevitably attracts resistance. Machiavelli wrote, "Men forget more easily the death of their father than the loss of their property." He understood something fundamental about human nature. People do not react to truth, they react to impact upon their interests. And the level 4 individual stops avoiding this reality. If level 3 was the mind of the fox, calculated, careful, cautious, level 4 is the emergence of the lion. Intelligence becomes executive. You no longer optimize situations, you close them. You no longer constantly negotiate perception. You impose direction. The difference is subtle for the observer, but enormous psychologically. At level 3, you ask, what is the safe move? At level 4, you ask, what is the decisive move? This is the transition most never make, because it involves losing approval. A person begins to say uncomfortable things without excessive explanation, begins deciding before consensus exists, begins accepting that some relationships will disappear. And the first interesting phenomenon appears. People begin reacting differently in your presence. Not because you became aggressive, but because uncertainty disappeared. The human mind seeks stability more than kindness. Machiavelli stated coldly, "It is safer to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." This phrase is often misunderstood. It is not about intimidation, it is about predictability. People tolerate severity if rules are clear, but they reject indecisive leaders. At this level, intelligence produces order. You decide quickly. You assume consequences. You do not redistribute blame. And this creates social gravity. People begin to align, not because they are manipulated, but because direction reduces collective anxiety. But here the hidden cost of level 4 appears. Visibility. The more you influence reality, the more you become a projection point. Success attracts competition. Authority attracts resentment. Clarity attracts opposition. The operator becomes a target. And most leaders remain trapped here. They work constantly to maintain direct control. They coordinate, they correct, they intervene. Their power depends on continuous presence. If they disappear, the system weakens. This is the limit of level 4. Intelligence still operates through effort, and exactly here appears the Machiavellian revelation: few truly integrate. Direct control is the most primitive form of control, because it creates resistance. If you push, someone pushes back. If you command, someone resents. True efficiency appears when the actions of others become voluntary. Here begins level 5. The transition is almost invisible. You do not become externally stronger, you become less detectable. If level 4 leads from the front, level 5 repositions the game from the shadows. Machiavelli wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are." This becomes the operational rule. Level 5 intelligence understands that people defend perceived freedom even when guided. You no longer push decisions. You build contexts in which the desired decision becomes the most natural choice. The difference is enormous. At level 4, you say, "We will do this." At level 5, others say, "We should do this." And they believe the idea belongs to them. Influence becomes psychological architecture. You observe dominant desires within the group. You anticipate conflicts. You introduce subtle incentives. The outcome appears without confrontation. People act without pressure. This is invisible intelligence. You no longer need to be the center of attention. In fact, visibility becomes unnecessary risk. Real power begins to prefer distance. At this level, conversations change. You speak less, you listen more, you intervene rarely, but decisively. To observers, you seem calm. To attentive minds, you become unreadable. Because you do not react impulsively, you wait for alignment of timing. Machiavelli constantly emphasized controlled appearance. A ruler must know well how to play his role. Deception is not the key. Adaptation. You become different for each interlocutor without losing internal direction. To some, you are an ally. To others an advisor, to others a competitor. No one sees the full structure. And yet, level 5 carries a profound danger: psychological distancing. When human behavior becomes predictable pattern, authentic connection becomes difficult. Empathy becomes analysis, affection becomes evaluation, relationships become systems. Many stop here believing they have reached the final form of power: influence without exposure, control without conflict. But there remains an invisible limit, because even the sophisticated manipulator still reacts to the board, still moves pieces, still plays the game. And here emerges the question that separates the final level. What happens when you no longer control people, but the conditions under which everyone chooses? This is the final transition. The zone where intelligence stops influencing individuals and begins shaping entire realities. The place where power becomes almost invisible even to the one exercising it, and where true self-mastery begins. There is an illusion that persists even among intelligent people: the belief that the peak of power means control over others. It is false. Control over people is unstable, costly, temporary. History is filled with leaders who dominated millions and disappeared the moment context changed. Machiavelli understood this fragility when he wrote, "A wise prince must rely on what depends on himself, not on what depends on others." This sentence marks entry into the final level of intelligence. Up to this point, you have passed through adaptation, imitation, strategy, authority, invisible influence. But all these forms share one element: the necessity of continuous intervention. Even the manipulator must constantly observe reactions. Even the influencer must continually adjust direction. True superiority appears when intervention becomes unnecessary. Level 5 is the intelligence of the architect. Here, the most radical shift of perspective occurs. You no longer view people as individual units of control. You view environment, structure, unwritten rules. You understand something most never notice. Human behavior is largely a reaction to context. If you want competition, create scarcity. If you want cooperation, create mutual dependence. If you want obedience, create uncertainty. You no longer persuade, you configure. Machiavelli indirectly suggested this principle when analyzing stable states. Good laws and good arms arise from one another. Order produces behavior, not the reverse. The architect does not win individual conflicts. He builds systems in which outcomes become inevitable. He thinks in years, not days, in dynamics, not emotions, in second and third order consequences. Instead of influencing one decision, he modifies incentives that will generate thousands of similar decisions. This is the fundamental difference. At previous levels, you influenced people. Here, you influence probabilities. A leader changes the direction of a team. A strategist changes the direction of an organization. An architect changes everyone's behavior without being present. And here, the final paradox appears. The higher intelligence rises, the more useless ego becomes, because personal recognition becomes irrelevant. You do not need to be seen. The system functions regardless. Power becomes silent, invisible, durable. But one final frontier remains, one rarely discussed in the psychology of power, because it is no longer about the world, it is about you. Most people believe self-mastery appears early. In reality, it appears last. After you understand people, after you understand strategies, after you understand systems, you realize something uncomfortable. The greatest remaining vulnerability is your own reaction. Fear of loss, need for control, attachment to outcomes. As long as these exist, someone can influence you. Machiavelli indirectly addressed this reality through the concept of fortuna, the inevitable chaos of the world. He wrote, "Fortune governs half of our actions, but the other half belongs to us." The final level appears when you stop fighting uncertainty. Intelligence becomes internal. You no longer react compulsively to success or failure. You no longer depend on validation. You no longer operate from fear. For the first time, you no longer need the world to behave in a certain way in order to remain stable. This is psychological sovereignty. The person here can descend at any time to previous levels. They can lead like the operator, calculate like the strategist, influence like the manipulator, but they do not remain trapped in any role. Roles become tools, identity becomes flexible, and this flexibility creates an extremely rare form of power, the impossibility of being anticipated, not because you are chaotic, but because you are not constrained by need. You cannot be intimidated if you do not seek approval. You cannot be bought if you do not seek status. You cannot be manipulated if you are not emotionally dependent on outcomes. This is the final form of Machiavellian intelligence, not domination of others, domination of the self. And here the mirror moment appears, because every listener exists somewhere between these levels. Some still optimize social acceptance. Some build intellectual identities. Some calculate every move strategically. Some lead and bear the weight of visibility. Some influence from the shadows. Few build systems, and extremely few fully control their own reactions. Ascension does not occur by adding information. It occurs by removing illusions. The illusion of safety, the illusion of approval, the illusion of absolute control. Every level demands renunciation. That is why most choose the comfort of the herd. It is warm there, predictable. But perception of reality changes once you see the hierarchy. You begin to observe conversations differently, decisions differently, ambitions differently. And above all, you begin to observe your own reactions. If you reach this point, you have probably already realized that this video was not about intelligence in the classical sense. It was about positioning, about the place from which you operate when no one is watching. And if this analysis changed even slightly the way you see people or yourself, then do one simple thing: like the video. Not for the algorithm, but because it signals that conversations like this deserve to exist in a space dominated by superficial noise. And subscribe, because most content teaches how to succeed inside the system. Here, we discuss how to understand the system before deciding whether it is worth playing. And those who stay until the end are almost always the ones who have already begun to climb.